staff, members of the Board of Trustees, it gives me great pleasure as headmaster of the Pingry School to welcome you to the opening convocation of the 2016-2017 academic year. Before you get too comfortable, I'm going to ask you to rise again as I invite Mr. Miller-Bugliari, as senior member of the faculty, to give the invocation. Mr. Bugliari.
What is your blueprint for the future? Recently, Pingry concluded a major capital campaign which exceeded its goal of $65 million. A campaign from which we all would benefit. A great many people worked on the campaign, both out front and behind the scene, strategizing, planning, and organizing the way forward. Many more supported the campaign with the generosity of their time and gifts, acknowledging the debt that we owe to the school, which educated, coached, and nurtured them. Others opt out, content to let the other guy give. Content to take, but not necessarily give back. What will your blueprint for the future be? Will you lead by example? Will you participate? Will you give back in some way? Or will you stand on the sidelines, content to let others do the work while you simply reap the benefits? Why not forge your own blueprint, set your own course, lead by example. Don't allow yourself to only take and not to give. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bugliari. You may be seated now. It is now my pleasure to introduce the first of our speakers today, President of the student body, Zach Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Conner, for the introduction. Welcome back, everybody. Feels like just yesterday that I was shaking Mr. Corvino's hand as I walked into my first day of school on the Short Hills campus. And now, here we sit, some of us at our first convocation, and some of us at our last. The upcoming presidential election is certainly going to be in our collective minds as we begin this next school year. Many seniors, myself included, even have the privilege of being able to vote for the first time, which only adds to the significance. However, I'm not going to be discussing the election or necessarily politics at all, but rather an issue that can sometimes become apparent during political discussions, closed-mindedness. Sometimes we can find ourselves so entrenched in what we already believe that it becomes impossible to consider anything else. We often surround ourselves with people that think the same way we do because it's comfortable. But the downside is that we don't get exposure to other ideas, and any challenges to our own belief system might be dismissed without any real thought, simply on the basis that it's different. It is my belief that this mindset is not conducive to personal growth or to an atmosphere of learning. In a letter to this year's incoming freshman class, the University of Chicago's Dean of Students, Jay Ellison, wrote, quote, "We expect members of our community to be engaged in rigorous debate, discussion, and even disagreement. The members of our community must have the freedom to espouse and explore a wide range of ideas." End quote. Ellison recognizes that a critical part of education is exposure to different perspectives. We grow emotionally and intellectually every time we challenge and re-examine ourselves. We should therefore be accepting of situations that push us beyond our comfort zone. Being open-minded means welcoming the opportunity to confront and consider the unknown and unfamiliar. But Ellison also points out that, quote, freedom of expression does not mean the freedom to harass or threaten others, end quote. This, I believe, is something the Pingry Honor Code anticipated. The Honor Code tells us how to conduct ourselves so that we can push each other to achieve personal growth while maintaining mutual trust and respect. If we know that the people in our community will treat us with respect, then we can feel a lot more comfortable about taking risks and trying new things. It's easy to fall into the trap of closed-mindedness. It's more comfortable to close ourselves off to new ideas and surround ourselves with people that think the same way we do. But those people aren't going to challenge us. They aren't going to push us, and they sure aren't going to make us more rounded and better people. That is why we're absolutely blessed to be in a school full of students and faculty that will challenge us. They will ask us to consider new information and ideas, things that may confuse or even make us uncomfortable. But that is what makes us grow as individuals, and we should be grateful for it. This does not require some big effort or grand gesture. Indeed, it can start with small steps. Try new food. Have a conversation with someone new. If you're an athlete, try attending the school play. If you're an artist, why not attend Friday Night Lights? Find out why your classmates are so passionate about what they do. Whether you're discussing politics, religion, or sports, it can be difficult to keep an open mind. But the rewards are great and the risks minimal. So as we head into the new school year, let's try to take advantage of the incredibly diverse and talented people that surround us here at Pingry. But also remember the commitment we have made to do so with a mindset of mutual growth, not one of competition or belittlement. It is with this balance that we, as a community and as individuals, can thrive. Let's have a great year. I'd now like to invite Sean Wang, this year's Honor Board Chairperson, to assist me in collecting the pledges.
Good morning, students, faculty, and board members. Excuse me. Welcome to Convocation and the new school year. This past summer, each student had to complete a reaffirmation of the Honor Code, the moral foundation of our school. It gives us the opportunity to reflect on the Honor Code and what it means to each of us and what it stands for in the Pingry community. While I was thinking about writing this speech and my own reaffirmation, I was reminded of a moment from the summer. There was a patient at the hospital where I volunteered. He was elderly, but also very rude and easily irritated. For us volunteers, the nurses, and the doctors, what could have been solved in 5 or 10 minutes took north of 30 minutes with this patient. One day, I was at home after a day volunteering and wondering, why does this patient seem to dislike everyone and everything? And why didn't he listen to anyone, even the doctors? In part, it might have been because the people with whom he interacted, were a fraction of his age. But then it dawned upon me, we had such a hard time dealing with this patient because he didn't trust us. Every day, he saw people who would ask him questions like, "Are you in pain, or can I get you something?" But he had no idea who they were or what they did at the hospital. How could he trust people he just met and who were a little too involved in his business? Yes, I admit, being shy of 20% of his age of his years probably factored into his lack of trust. But then I started asking, what makes trust so important? You can't see or feel trust in the same way you could with, say, writing words on a piece of paper or taking a bite into an apple. Trust is intangible. Furthermore, when I share my trust with someone, I can't give them a certificate saying one Sean Wang trust. Trust is a bond, and a strong one at that. It's where we can forego some of our own control on a subject matter and rely on another to complete it. For example, a patient trusts that their doctor and nurses make sound decisions to resolve the patient's pain or illness. However, trust is also reciprocal, or a two-way street. To continue on the patient example, the doctors and nurses trust that their patient provides accurate information to the best of their ability. Similarly, We as members of the Pingry community trust each other to follow the tenets of the honor code. We as members of the student body trust others for support, whether it be when we need help studying for tests or coming to our games. We as students trust our teachers to give us the best education and the school to give us a fulfilling high school experience. Again, trust is something that is reciprocated. In turn, we must help our fellow classmates, be active students in the classroom, and take part in our community. By being a member of this community, we are privileged to be a part of that special trust. Beyond leaving our backpacks in the hall, this trust also allows us to be open with one another. I can't count the number of times I've been able to have a sit-down conversation with my teachers just about life, or when I had a deep conversation with friends. Even when you graduate from Pingry, that trust in the honor code will stick. The honor code is, to me, a set of lifelong values to make one a better person. With that in mind, one of the most important values is working towards the community. There's an old African proverb that I think goes well with the honor code. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And if we read what the honor code states, it believes that a right-thinking member of the student body will want to so conduct himself as to further the best interests of the whole school, of his class, and of any team or club to which he may belong. He will act as a member of the group, working with it rather than calculating his own advantage. It becomes evident that trusting in others and effort towards the greater good is something we value here, and a sentiment I believe should follow you everywhere. It's one of the ways we can show our dedication to the school. Another example of our dedication is the reaffirmation of the honor code. Your signature, your acceptance of taking on the responsibilities of being a Pingry student is also a symbol of trust. We have given our word that we will abide, even champion the honor code. And in return, we are given the opportunity to take part in such a fantastic school and community. On a final note, I'd like to challenge each of you to take on the trust of another and to reciprocate it. It will be a long journey, but I assure you that that trust is worthy of the challenge. Thank you, and I wish you all a happy school year. This morning, we met with our advisor groups and signed pledges that affirmed our commitment to the honor code. The signed pledges will hang in our advisor meeting locations for the remainder of the year. I hope that the pledges serve as a reminder of our commitment to the code, even in times when it may be difficult. I will now call advisor group representatives from the middle school to hand in their pledges at the center of this stage. Now, if the freshman and sophomore representatives will please come to the stage.
lastly, we'd like to welcome the junior and senior representatives up to the stage.
All right, guys. That's a trip.
The honor code is the most fundamental part of our value system here at Pingry. This pledge ceremony demonstrates our student ownership of the code and our personal assumption of responsibility. With a new school year ahead of us, our challenge is to remember this day and the promise we made to the people sitting around us. As the honor code states, he or she will act as a member of the group working with it rather than calculating his or her own advantage. This is a foundation for all of us to live by, not only here at Pingry, but in our lives outside these walls and down the road of the world. It is my hope that we will all aspire to the common goal of upholding integrity and respect during our lives here at Pingry and onwards. With that said, let's have a great year.
Thank you, Sean and Zach. Our next speaker this morning is Mr. Jeff Edwards, member of the Pingry class of 1978, parent of 2 Pingry graduates, and a current member of the class of 2018, and chair of the Pingry Board of Trustees. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Good morning to everybody, and welcome back. Did you, like me, spend a good part of August watching the Olympics? There were so many incredible performances of academic brilliance that I'm not sure I could say whether I was more impressed by Michael Phelps or Simone Biles or Usain Bolt. Frankly, they were all remarkable. But the Olympics are different from other sporting events. They're not just about extraordinary athleticism. The Olympics embody a greater set of values that elevate them and inspire us to greater and more important ways. And so I want to highlight this morning an athletic event in which none of these spectacular athletes participated. I confess it's one that I'd never watched before, and I am not even sure when it was last televised. But first, a little history. The modern Olympic movement traces to the leadership of Pierre de Coubertin, a French educator. Baron de Coubertin intended Olympism to be a philosophy of life and essentially viewed athletic competition as a metaphor. The three core values of Olympicism are excellence, friendship, and respect. As the Olympics have gained in stature, we certainly witnessed excellence, and it was on full display in Rio and by no means limited to, although perhaps best exemplified by Bolt, Biles, and Phelps. But in the philosophy of Olympicism, excellence is better understood as do your best in your own context and towards your own personal goals. Friendship is a value of team spirit and joy in competing and speaks to relationships between both teammates and competitors. And respect is intended to encompass ideas of fair play, respect for rules, self-respect, and respect for others, including, in a global context, of course, respect for different cultures. Taken together, these values are about far more than just obtaining a gold medal. As de Coubertin himself said, quote, "The important thing at the Olympic Games is not to win, but to take part," end quote. And extending this theme more broadly, he said, quote, "The most important part of life is not to triumph, but to compete," end quote. In Rio this summer, a total of 974 gold, silver, and bronze medals were awarded. But I would like to draw your attention to two athletes who won no such medals, but were the only athletes to receive the Fair Play Award from the International Olympic Committee, Abby D'Agostino of the United States and Nikki Hamblin of New Zealand, for their performance in a preliminary round of the 5,000 meter women's race. Perhaps you've already seen it on the news or on YouTube, and if you haven't, I recommend it, as this brief description will certainly not do any justice to the poignancy of the race. More than halfway through, the two runners became entangled and both fell to the ground. Then D'Agostino got up, but rather than resuming the race, she put her hand on Hamblin's shoulder and urged her, Hamblin remaining sprawled on the ground in pain, and D'Agostino urged her to get up and finish the race. As Hamblin later recounted, she heard D'Agostino say, get up. We have to finish this. It's the Olympics." Later in the race, D'Agostino, hobbling on a torn ACL, also fell, and Hamblin helped her to get back up as well. Both runners finished the race in pain, but displayed the purest and greatest embodiment of Olympism at the Rio Games. I believe in the values of Olympism, and I would urge you as you begin the 2016-17 school year to consider their merits. I hope you will approach the year ahead seeking excellence in the classroom, on the athletic field, and in the arts. But excellence in the Olympic sense of the word, of setting personal goals, pursuing them with vigor, and doing your very best each and every day. I appeal to you to seek true friendship in the Pingry community broadly, and to demonstrate respect in the fullest sense of that word with the honor code as your guide. If we all adopt these values, this will be a truly tremendous year for Pingry and for each of you. August was for spectating, but this is September, and it's time to get on with the race. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Pingry is fortunate in having a truly extraordinary faculty. And the heart and soul of that faculty is those teachers who have dedicated themselves to service in this school for 25 or more years, the McGee-Speed. Before I begin my remarks, please join me in recognizing this exceptional group of people who have collectively served the Pingry School for 1,018 years. As I read your names, would you stand and remain standing until all the names have been called? And I would ask as difficult as it may be, that you hold your applause until all of the geese are standing and then join me in recognizing their contributions. I will start this year with the most junior among this long-tenured group of faculty. Drew Burns, beginning his 27th year. Susan Deneen, beginning her 27th year. Patricia Wheeler, beginning her 27th year. Donna Thau, beginning her 28th year. Rich Frywald, beginning his 29th year. Kelly Jordan, beginning her 29th year. Tom Keating, beginning his 29th year. Al Romano, beginning his 29th year. Michael Webster, beginning his 30th year. Patricia Ewer, beginning her 31st year. Susan Morato, beginning her 32nd year. Bill Bourne, beginning his 33rd year. Chuck Coe, beginning his 33rd year. Patty Finn, beginning her 33rd year. Tim Grant, beginning his 33rd year. Vicki Grant, beginning her 33rd year. Joan Perlman, beginning her 34th year. Tom Boyer, beginning his 35th year. Joe Fort, beginning his 35th year. Lydia Giacintoff, beginning her 36th year. Brian LaFontaine, beginning his 36th year. Norman Lavalette, beginning his 38th year. Victor Nazario, beginning his 40th year. Peter Delman, beginning his 41st year. Peter Thompson, beginning his 41st year. Ted Corvino, beginning his 43rd year. Kathy Everett, beginning her 45th year. Manny Tramontana, beginning his 53rd year. And Miller Bugliari, beginning his 58th year. Thank you. Each year at Convocation, we get to hear speeches by students, by the board chair, and by the headmaster. None of us confers in advance about what we're going to say, but every year there are common themes. And I think this year you'll find something a little bit remarkable about two of the speeches. But I'll leave you to listen and see what you think. So each summer, as the new school year draws near, a number of predictable things happen. The days begin to get noticeably shorter, the nights a bit cooler, baseball standings become a little bit more meaningful. Go Red Sox. If you work in schools, as you know I do, people start using the past tense when they ask about the summer. Did you have a good summer, they say, when it's still August. And if you work in schools, you write and mail home your annual back-to-school letters to students and families. Your family's received such letters recently from Ms. Ham, if you're in the middle school, or Ms. Chatterjee, if you're in the upper school. I'm going to return to the back-to-school letter in a moment, so don't let me forget. Over the last few school years, one recurring news story has had to do with the role in colleges and universities of the exchange of ideas that are sometimes unpopular, provocative, or even offensive. On college campus after college campus, student and sometimes faculty protest has led to speakers with whose views or even backgrounds people disagreed being disinvited or declining to speak or being heckled and shouted down. Each of these outcomes effectively silenced the speakers and their ideas. While many of the speakers who have been silenced in these ways are people whose original invitations were mystifying and whose absence from the podium would not be missed, many others are people whose perspectives, even if you don't agree with them, are worthy of discussion and debate. There are many who would argue that this is a simple First Amendment matter. Perhaps a bit of explanation is in order here. As many of you know, but others may not, the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was part of the Bill of Rights, which was composed of 10 amendments and which was adopted 225 years ago in 1791. The First Amendment states, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." Clearly, there's a lot going on in the First Amendment, but the part that people are referring to when they decry what they refer to as campus censorship is the phrase about freedom of speech. As I said, there are many who would argue that this is a simple First Amendment matter. But I question whether it is, in fact, all that simple. You see, truly free speech allows people to espouse unpopular, wrong, offensive, and even hurtful ideas. And when we think about what that means in a community like ours, I hope you can see how it becomes more complicated. For example, I can't argue, and I don't think you would either, that we should prevent people in our community from stating unpopular ideas. I can't argue, and I don't think you would either, that we should prevent people in our community from stating ideas that are wrong. I support your right to be wrong. That was a joke. But as we transition to ideas or statements that are offensive or hurtful, it becomes more difficult to make blanket assertions about those ideas or statements being protected by the First Amendment. I promised I would come back to the back to school letter, so let me do so now, and it's a back to school letter that you're already familiar with, because Zach mentioned it. This summer, the University of Chicago, as Zach said, sent home to incoming students their summer letter, and it tackled this very issue. In so doing, Chicago added fuel to an already active debate. Much of the letter is completely unobjectionable. I will read a passage that you've already heard part of. Quote, "One of the University of Chicago's defining characteristics is our commitment to freedom of inquiry and expression. Members of our community are encouraged to speak, write, listen, challenge, and learn without fear of censorship. Civility and mutual respect are vital to all of us, and freedom of expression does not mean the freedom to harass or threaten others." Unquote. Not much to argue about, is there? But do you see a possible tension between the beginning of the passage I read and its end? Most of you know me well enough to know that I wouldn't ask that question if I didn't see a tension there. Many of the things that we are given as rights or as privileges come with expectations, and speech is no different. With freedom comes responsibility, and with freedom of speech comes the imperative to speak responsibly. But how is that imperative to be enforced? And whose judgment should guide decisions about what is responsible versus irresponsible speech, or what is challenging versus hurtful? These questions are particularly important in this era when the role models we have for public speech, politicians and the media, so often violate the imperative to speak responsibly and are, as far as I can tell, being rewarded for doing so. I believe the answer is that we must each take personal responsibility for our own words. Whether we are delivering a speech, participating in class, talking in the hall or at lunch, or posting on Instagram, we each need to ask ourselves if what we are saying is responsible, even if it is challenging, or if it is irresponsible or even hurtful. And we need to help each other take responsibility as well. Because if we tolerate hurtful speech, we are participating in it as surely as if we had uttered it ourselves. In fact, you have already made a commitment to taking this responsibility. I'm speaking, of course, about the Honor Code. Under this podium are hundreds of signatures that you presented to Sean and Zach just a few minutes ago. our collective individual commitments to live our lives in keeping with the tenets of the Honor Code make this community an extraordinary place to live, learn, and grow. I said earlier that with freedom comes responsibility, and with freedom of speech comes the imperative to speak responsibly. I asked how that imperative should be enforced, and I asked whose judgment should guide decisions about speech. When you signed the Honor Code this morning, you may not have realized that you were the answer to those questions, that you were committed to take responsibility for your speech, that you were. Think about what the Honor Code asks of each of us. It asks that we live a life based on personal integrity and genuine concern for others. It asks that we honor the rights of others. And it asks that we act as responsible members of the community, working for the common good rather than solely for personal advantage. What better basis could there be for making sound judgments about the responsible exercise of your right to speech? So as you engage with this new school year, I charge you to exercise your right to speak, and I remind you of your pledge to speak thoughtfully. Let's have a great year, but first, please join me in a rousing rendition of Old John Pingry.